So I'm Ben Moreau, 2013 City to Surf winner, represented Great Britain at 2 Commonwealth Games, and you're listening to the Peak Performance Show.
You are good looking. I enjoy looking at you, Ben.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
Phelps with 10 meters left. 3 minutes too good. The crowd roaring. Freeman gets down.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Listeners, welcome to another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I trust you well, and I hope you've been having a great week. Today's show, as always, is lovingly brought to you by POGO Physio. We exist to help you perform at your physical best, and we do this through our industry-first, fixed fee and unlimited access 2, 6 and 12-week finish line programs. What's the finish line? It's really simple. We want everyone who walks through the doors of POGO to get back to their physical best, to hear the magic words that they've finished their rehabilitation. We love you, but we don't need to see you again, at least for this injury. So if you'd like to find out more about POGO's finish line programs or our 1 hour Discover Recover initial appointments, or even now our wellness boosters, jump over to pogophysio.com.au and stay tuned in 2018 for POGO practices coming to a state near you featuring the finish line programs. If it's your first time joining us today, a massive thank you. If it is your 83rd time, an enormous thank you. Your support means everything, guys. It can be a lonely world podcasting, so the return visits mean a lot. And thanks for all the feedback on how we can continue to improve the show. I take that all seriously and know that each week we are looking to do things better and serve you up guests that will inspire you with their sharings of their highs and lows and learnings through their career. Thank you to the listeners that have been leaving reviews on iTunes. If you're enjoying the program and you're yet to leave a review, it would mean an enormous amount if you'd take the time to pop over to iTunes, leave a review. It's as simple as clicking ratings and review, and away you go. Massive thank you to Rob Goyen, who recently rated the Physical Performance Show 5 stars, and Rob commented, "Hi Brad, as a lover of all thing running and outdoors, I find your podcast brilliant. You have opened my eyes to so many athletes I had not heard of and really don't get enough coverage from the mainstream media, which is sad as they sometimes put their life on hold for the love of the sport. You are doing an amazing job giving them some airtime. From someone who loves podcasts, I would love to hear your story on what inspired you to start the podcast and how much goes into behind the scenes working of it. Keep up the amazing work, Rob." Rob, thanks very much for leaving a review. And look, down the track, we may speak a little bit more about that, so stay tuned potentially for that episode. But thanks for your support, Rob. Listeners, it's as simple as clicking ratings and review. If you're yet to leave one, please do so. It helps this program get in the ears of more listeners who, just like you, are looking to pursue at your physical best. All right, listeners, this week's episode features Ben Moreau. Ben Moreau is a great British runner of esteem. Ben's been a dual Commonwealth Games representative runner in the marathon at both the New Delhi and then the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. Ben was the 2013 winner of the City to Surf. Ben shares today around the highs, the lows, and his learnings through his career. We talk about things not going to plan in terms of qualifying for the Olympic Games in 2016 and how Ben set about dealing with that despite the setbacks. Ben's got some very handy PBs. This boy can run PBs of 14:09 for the 5,000 metres, 28:40, 10,000 metres where he picked up a bronze in the Zatopek Classic here in Australia, half marathon, a 63:59 and a obviously a marathon at 2:15:52. So you're going to really take a lot out of Ben Moreau's sharings. So let's jump straight in with Ben Moreau. So, listeners, joining us today on the Physical Performance Show, we've got Ben Moreau. And as per Ben's bio, Ben is a very well-credentialed and well-seasoned runner, and certainly a runner I've enjoyed seeing the progressions around over the years. One that I've had the fun and pleasure of running alongside as a long run that was a faster long run for me than normal here at the Gold Coast Airport Marathon weekend. But Ben, welcome to the program.
Hey, Brad, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Mate, we like to start with something a little bit funny, and that's what's one thing that scares Ben Moreau?
So I was actually thinking about this the other day because I heard a couple of your other podcasts, and something I was chatting to some friends about as well. So this is it's probably quite good. I've got no real phobias, so I know snakes and spiders are the main ones. I don't like them, but they're not. I don't have any phobias. But I thought this was a scenario that would be quite scary, and that's so at work I'm on the top floor, so you get in the lift and you go all the way to top floor, and it seems to happen quite a lot that I'm always in a rush. I'm always sort of just sort of trying to be as efficient as possible with time, so sort of get in the lift, and then I realize that I really need the bathroom, and I just have to everyone's getting in the lift, out the lift, get all the way to the top, and it struck me the other day, what would happen if that lift just broke down? I literally would probably only last about 10 minutes. And I'd be in a lift with work colleagues, a load of other people in suits. And that would actually be one of the worst experiences ever, is having to just sort of, everyone just be looking at you literally just desperately need the bathroom when you got in this lift, didn't you? And I just have no idea how long I'd be in there or how I'd deal with that. So I think that's probably, that's a real scenario that could actually happen. And that's something that I think I need to change and just make sure I just always find a bathroom before I get in a lift from now on.
Well, Ben, it's interesting. I have lived that pain. I kid you not. But I was
really?
stuck in Surfer's Paradise in a lift, needing to go to the bathroom by myself. And so it took them a good 45 minutes to get me out of there. So I'll leave the rest to people's imaginations. There wasn't other corporates around me in suits. But Ben, in terms of, you mentioned something I think is interesting there. Efficiency, you like to be as efficient in everything that you do. Where does that come from?
It's a good question. I think some of that is running. So trying to juggle a full-time job and, trying to train for marathons. It's time is the most sort of precious thing there. And my job was never been really long hours, but trying to fit in both. I think you do need to be pretty efficient. And so I would always, I'm not someone that and getting the most sleep you can as well. So I'm not someone who gets up 45 minutes before I go for a run. I would be up, out of bed and out the door. I would try and commute from work, where it was suitable. So for running as well, running lunch break. So I think it's always just been, I always try and do as much with my time as I can. I have days where I just sit there and watch TV all day as well. But I think when I've got things I need to do, I just try and squeeze it in and get it done. And I think sort of definitely that juggling of running and working over sort of however long it is, 15 years or so, 10 years, has played into that. And I think that's probably just, that's been my mindset. And it's sort of always sort of still, stayed with me, is just trying to try and multitask. I'm always trying to do a few things at the same time, just to give me that sort of time efficiency. It becomes a bit of a challenge as well. It's sort of a game I play with myself. Is sort of, if I've got to do this thing, what other stuff can I get done at the same time to be efficient? It's probably purely doesn't really work out that way because I end up doing a few things inefficiently, but it's just something I like sort of playing with myself to try and see what other stuff I could get done at the same time.
I think it's a mindset. I so relate to it, Ben. I think it's a mindset of a maximizer, trying to maximize everything that you've got, and as you say, I think it could be an illusion at times where you're trying to do all things well and do them concomitantly, but I think there's also a common bond, I think, that probably exists amongst a lot of the athletic population where that exists in different variations, obviously. Work-wise, though, Ben, put listeners in perspective of your professional life, your working life, that is.
Yeah, sure. So I work for a company called Experience. So they actually bought a startup that I worked for in London, which is why I moved to Sydney in the first place. Two reasons. One, they wanted someone to do a similar job in Sydney, and two, my now wife is Australian, but I met her in London. So I work for them. And at the moment, I'm actually in Singapore. Moved here 6 months ago. I run their innovation hub now. So what they do is they get data on people. Some people might know them as being like credit data on people, and they work a lot with banks. But I actually always did their sort of internet marketing side in Sydney, because they also get data on people and then help people advertise to those people on the internet through Facebook and those sort of guys. But now I've sort of run an innovation hub, which sounds quite, I guess it is pretty trendy and sexy. It's quite fun. And you know, people be right in thinking that there's a lot of nothingness to it as well. When people go, oh, it's innovation, you know, what is that? That's fair enough. But it's sort of, I do the stuff that's a little bit different in the business, I guess. I'm not one of the hardcore banking credit data people. I don't really fully understand that side of it, but I do the stuff that's trying to do things a little bit differently there.
And when it comes to innovation, what's your definition of innovation, Ben? I know we're a little bit left of the running stuff at the moment, but this is good.
I think it's trying to do something in a very different way. So, like, give you an example of what some of the stuff we're trying to do now. It's, you know, normally someone would apply for a bank account and there'd be a load of information on those people, whether they've paid their electricity bills or whether they've paid their credit card bills. But where I am now, we're looking at places like Indonesia where people pay everything in cash. So how does anyone do anything? But there's a load of data on their mobile phones because everyone's on their mobile. Everyone has a mobile. There's a load of information on people there. So how can we help use that information? You know, people use Uber and there's reputational data about how good they are as passengers and all that sort of stuff. How can we use that to, which is different information, but use it in a way that normally it wouldn't be used? So that's the sort of example of some of the stuff we're doing is trying to get to the same place but in a different way. And so it's about trying to see how other companies do it, how people do it in completely different places, and you know, just think about things quite differently. But yeah, that's sort of what we're doing. It's quite interesting. I quite like it.
Innovative. Quite innovative. Goes with the role. And you've made we were speaking before we went online here, Ben, and you've made a recent shift geographically to Singapore. How's that been for you?
It's been good. Look, I think you know, we were chatting before. I think part of the reasons I moved was that after not making the last Olympics, I sort of thought, well, how important is running something that I'm willing to put as the sole priority in my life now? And I thought, well, actually, it's starting to feel like it's, you know, it's starting to feel like I'm giving things up rather than it's the only thing I want to do in my life. So I made a decision that I'm going to run a little bit less, which with the climate here, you can't run 200 Ks a week. Well, you could, but it'd be horrible. I'm still running here and I'm enjoying it, but I'm running less than I was. So part of it was, okay, if running is a bit less of a priority, then, you know, the opportunity for the job that was here means that I can make that move. Also, I really love travel. So Australia I loved, but unless you want to travel just within Australia or go to New Zealand, it's pretty tough to travel a lot. And obviously being here, I can, you know, there's about 8 different countries I could be within 2 hours flight from here. You can do weekends away really easily. So the travel side, and I've seen barely any of Asia. So the travel side played a part. And I think it's like me and my wife as well, we're sort of people that like doing experiencing stuff that's different. So to live somewhere else for a while, like I said, I met my wife in London. She was there for a couple of years. And so to live somewhere else for a while and sort of experience a different lifestyle for a bit was something that we were keen on doing. I don't think it's going to be we'll be here forever, but at the moment we're enjoying it. We've had a few weekends in sort of Indonesia and Malaysia and like Myanmar and places. So it's like that's experience side has been really, really good. But yeah, the humidity and the climate for running is certainly less enjoyable. Yeah. But that's the trade-off.
That's the trade-off. And you mentioned you're running less kilometres. I'm still intrigued, Ben, as would listeners be. How many kilometres on average have you been running since you've been in Singapore?
I've probably been doing about 100k a week or so. I actually came here thinking I might not run at all, but I've actually sort of got a bit of the love back after not making the last Olympics. I'm actually enjoying running. I've got some of the best Singaporean guys, and they're not as good as the best Aussies and the best Brits. I think the marathon record holder at the moment is sort of 2:26, 2:25. There's a couple of good Singaporean guys I'm running with. I'm sort of doing once a day as opposed to twice a day. And because of some of the travel I do for work, some weeks I might only be running 3 or 4 days a week. That's just part of the job. But I'm still running every week, and most weeks probably I'm doing 5 or 6 days a week and hitting about 100 Ks at the moment.
Yeah, certainly. Let's go, Ben. Let's reverse engineer your career, if you like. You mentioned there you contemplated when you went to Singapore. You thought you might not, even run. You were obviously still digesting the disappointment of the 2016 Olympic campaign that you were on there to make the Great British team for the marathon. Can you take listeners through a little bit of that 2016 campaign journey, and then we'll rewind from there?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I was in Sydney at that time, and there are a couple things that came into play there. One, I had a really good 2013 and 2014, and I started to hit some injury issues in 2015. So it was actually top of hamstring, sort of the tendon there right at the top of the hamstring. That meant that I couldn't do Chicago Marathon, and I had some patchy training. And that really came back right at the end of 2015. I had to have a PRP injection. I went to Falls Creek to train, but I spent a week of it not running. I spent 2 weeks just getting back into running. So I went there just to get motivated, really, rather than for the training. So that's right at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. So not ideal. And at the time, I think if I was honest, I thought I'm not going to make the start line of London Marathon, which was the trial for the UK. You had to go to London and run that race. But it actually, the tendon healed. I got some pretty good training in, and got pretty fit. Fit enough, at least. I thought, actually, maybe I can still have a good race at London. And it wasn't awful. I ran a 2:19 there. I was with Derek Hawkins at halfway, who ended up qualifying for the team. He had a really strong second half of the race. But I think I knew when I got to halfway that I wasn't going to be able to hold it. I wasn't going to be able to push on. And really the problem for me was just I was getting a lot of, and it was actually starting to move into the left sort of tendon as well, hamstring tendon as well. So I was always training through a little bit of pain. And I got to the start line, and I ran an okay race, but the mileage required to run a really strong marathon, the consistency throughout the year was really starting to trouble me. And I think that was part of the problem. I was just half baked when I got to the start line. Like I said, I still ran okay and I gave it everything, but I just wasn't able to train at the volume over the months and months and months to stay fit. And I think probably part of the problem of having a job is I'm sitting down at my desk, which didn't help.
Yep.
Couldn't do enough of the rehab stuff that I probably needed to. I was doing some gym work and I was getting some physio, but I was, that side of it's always the first side that goes for me, because I give up all my time I need for training, and then I squeeze in what I can on the rehab and sort of conditioning side. So that was sort of the build up. And I think probably, I alluded it to before, but part of it was I was starting to feel like it's probably part of the fact that the training wasn't going amazingly and I wasn't, kicking goals all over the place. But I was starting to feel like this was a bit of a grind. I'm 35 now, and I was starting to feel like I'm doing this, I'm giving up a lot of stuff, and it started to feel like I was giving it up rather than I'm loving this is all I want to do. And you hear a lot of runners say this, and people talk about sacrifices, and runners say, yeah, I am sacrificing stuff, but they don't see it that way.
Yep.
I've always been a bit in between. I've always sort of had a social life, and I've always wanted to squeeze things in, like I said, trying to be efficient, squeeze things in around running when it's suited so that I could have a bit of a life outside running. But I was starting to really feel like, I'm doing all this training. It's not going amazingly, and there's other stuff I could be doing, like, going out with friends, just simple things like just seeing friends for dinner in the week that I just can't do. So I'm starting to sort of question whether I really, really want to do this all the time with my life. And that was sort of, that probably came to a bit of a head after the race. Like, well, that wasn't amazing. These injury issues aren't going away. They've been here 9 months or so. What do I want to do? Do I want to keep trying to grind through this, or do I want to sort of maybe step back for a bit and you know, do a few different things. So that was all sort of came to a head probably after that London Marathon trial.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much there, Ben. I think you know, obviously you were trying to juggle quite a few balls, your professional working life, your more or less professional running life in terms of, you know, you can aiming to compete at the highest level. And it's almost, you know, in the irony I find, Ben, in transitioning beyond that, you know, highest level of pursuit athletically, you've got something here which might help smooth out that transition as in your professional working life, whereas some athletes that haven't had that but maybe had more opportunity to maximise their athletic potential. You know, you referenced, you know, leaving time out for rehabbing the proximal hamstring tendon problem, and I know how much time that requires, particularly for an elite athlete if it's a nasty tendon injury. I think it's almost a duality, isn't it? It may have robbed some of your athletic performance, the fact that you've been trying to do it all at once, but then it's probably helped you transition to some degree, and I'm sure you're still transitioning. What do you think about that?
I agree with that. I think, look, actually, when I think back to 2012 as well, it's quite interesting. With 2012 was the year I moved to Australia, but I gave up work in January to focus for 3 or 4 months just on trying to qualify for the Olympics there. And if I'm honest, and I trained the house down. I think I probably, it's possible that I overtrained a little bit. I went to Kenya for 3 weeks. I went to Portugal to just train for a month. But I think actually the biggest problem was it got in my head. I got to the start line in London, and I remember I had a few injury niggles. I had like a bit of a toe injury where I sort of stood a bit weird on a stone when I was out running. I remember when I got that injury in Portugal, I was sort of like, well, maybe this means I won't have to run London. And it got in my head the other way. I knew after that I couldn't cope, I don't think, with being a full-time professional athlete. I can't. And I don't know if it's that sort of, like, you know, that efficiency mindset thing again there, but I felt I love going away on training camps. I always loved being able to spend 3 weeks out of my life to go and train. I loved that. But when that was sort of my focus for 3 months, I found that probably too hard. And I guess it's something that I might have adjusted to over time. I might have been able to work out how to cope with it, but I almost felt like I was never doing enough. I should be doing more. I wouldn't say that I trained ridiculous amounts. I just meant that I could rest more, and I was probably training a little bit harder than normal. So I didn't go absolutely bonkers on the training, but I was definitely doing a little bit more than normal. It never really clicked. Like, I ran a half marathon in the build-up, and I ran a really small PB. So it wasn't awful, but it never really clicked. And I got to London in 2012. I dropped out at 30k.
And this is a London Marathon, Ben, right? To put listeners in the box set. This is the necessary qualifying race to be part of the Great British team for the 2012 London hometown Olympic Games. So you got to 30k's, Ben, and
I just dropped out. So I started the race, and I knew something after about 10k I was going backwards. So set off at sort of 2:13, 2:14 pace or something, which is what I thought. I think the qualifying time was 2:12, but I thought they might relax it. And in retrospect, they did, because they took, I think it was Lee Merrion who ran 2:13, 2:14 on the day. So I knew I wasn't going to run sub 2:12. I wasn't going to run a 4-minute PB, 5-minute PB. But I thought, well, let's gamble, run a sensible race, and hopefully they'll change the qualifying time, or maybe I'll have an absolute blinder and I can get under 2:12. So I did that. But after 10k, I was starting to go backwards. I sort of fell apart a bit from there. I couldn't get back into race mode. And it's something that I've experienced in marathons. There's almost like and in races generally, like sometimes I've noticed it in a couple marathons, you just click out of race mode and you're just running. And I was just doing that. I was like, I'm just running. Like, I don't feel tired, but I'm just running. And so I got to 30k and I just thought, this is pointless. And I just stopped. I had a bit of a tantrum, basically. I just went, right, this isn't. I remember having a few hamstring niggles going into that race, and I sort of told myself that was the reason why I was stopping. But I think if I was running 2:12 pace, I would have carried on. I just stopped, and I think I couldn't do at that time. I couldn't do the full, I'm just an athlete, that's all I do. I needed other stuff in my life to be trying to squeeze in running, and running to be the distraction rather than to be the sole focus, I think. Yeah. I think that's part of who I am. And because maybe it's just because it's always been that way. So I'm not someone that was ever a full-time athlete. I could never earn enough money to justify that. But I couldn't cope, I think, mentally with running is all I do. I found it really hard to to be that person. And I think the main reason that that it wasn't clicking was just the mental side of it.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say thanks for being so transparent, Ben. I think this will really help listeners. Do you have any regrets around those Olympic campaigns, though? Knowing that you are who you are, you're wired how you are very self-aware of, as you've just articulated, how you're made up. Do you have any regrets, or in your heart you gave both 2012 and 2016 everything you could? No,
I don't have any regrets. Like, I think I did the right thing in saying, right, let's focus on running for a few months to see what happens. Because part of that, when I made a big jump in 2010, I went from, I just started doing marathons a couple of years before that. And I did take running more seriously because, like I said, I used to go out for a few drinks with friends. I wouldn't get drunk, but I would, never get enough sleep maybe. And I said, right, 3 months, I'm not drinking. I don't drink anything. And I made a big jump from 2.6 to 2.21 to 2.16. And I thought, okay, when you do commit, big jumps can happen.
Yep.
And so I thought, right, let's throw everything at this and see if I can do that again. So I think it was the right decision to do that. I think I wanted to know what could happen. Training at altitude for a few weeks, that could have made the difference. In 2012, going to Kenya, and again, the experience was awesome. If I look back, I loved going and seeing how the Kenyans train, jumping in with those crazy fartlek sessions they do. That's one of the sessions that probably broke me more than anything. I remember just curling up on the sofa after that. Just like my wife sort of stepped in the house. She's like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm okay. It was hard, but I'm okay." And then it hit me about an hour later. It's like, I cannot run again today. I am done.
So what was the session? Take us on that journey, Ben. This is in Kenya.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I remember it's a Thursday morning session, I think, and they start at maybe 8 a.m., something like that. And you just turn up. And I remember, I got there at 8 a.m. and there's not many people there. And this is Kenya, so that they're going to turn up. And then a few people turn up, and then all of a sudden there's 200 people. And I just sat at the back. I was like, okay. And they do a mix of fartleks. So it's a 40-minute fartlek, I think. No, an hour fartlek. So I did 20 times 2 minutes with, I think, it was either 1 minute or 2 minute float recovery. And it starts off hard. And I sat right at the back, and I said, I'm not going to, I was being quite sensible. I was like, I won't do the hard bits too hard. I'll keep it more of a sort of almost like a monofartlek style where you just sort of surge and float. So I'll keep it reasonably steady rather than sprint and jog. And it was an hour-long run, but it ends up the hill. So after a while, I was moving through people. Loads drop out. All the women go way ahead of me, but then they end up dropping out. But I remember looking up, thinking, I've sort of worked through loads of people. I must be sort of starting to tag on to the front group, maybe. I remember looking up, and there's 2 groups ahead of me, and there's like still 60 people. But I got it done, and I sort of, when it got into the 2 minute surges up the hills, they're not surges, you're just running. You can't surge up those hills at altitude when you're not fully used to it. So I was just running up there. So I'm just going to run home reasonably steady now. So I finished it. And then I just but it's an hour long effort. And 2 minute surges. And I was just
cool.
Absolutely. Think of it like doing a mono, but for an hour, basically. It's like that. So I remember sort of getting it done. I just sort of jogged back along because where I was staying is along where most people stay is at the top of the hill, the main road there. I jogged back along that. Thought I probably don't need to do much more of a warm down, to be honest. I've done 80 minutes. If I include my warm up, I'll just get home and recover. But yeah, it's rolling hills all the way. It's like a race. Like, people go off absolutely crazy at the start. So I just sort of sat back and you notice people surging off, and then you sort of it's like an accordion. It sort of comes back together when they're jogging. And I started catching up, and then it's a crazy experience. It's well worth experiencing, but it is hard.
200 runners. And what's one observation you took from it, Ben, that was different to how you thought it would be training in Kenya?
It's like generally, I mean, it is amazing just seeing all the guys there. The observation I remember is there's so many guys that are desperate to prove themselves to the European agents or the coaches, and they all think they can do it. You talk to them and like, yeah, I can run, 2.7, 2.8, and they turn up to every session and they smash themselves until they can't run anymore. So loads of them don't finish a session. They drop out. So it's a completely different mindset to the way I train, which is just get it done. You run reasonably sensibly, and if you feel good towards the second half of the session, then you can pick it up. But these guys are just going off with the leaders, hanging for as long as they could, because they've just got to get the attention of the coaches, because that's their life. That's the way they get out, is getting some sort of support, structure, someone that can help them get a visa and earn some money. And so it's so different to when you train with a group back home, where you sort of go, right, we've got 10 by a K, we just, you've just got to get it done. If you have a bad day, you drop off and you just get it done.
Yeah.
Because we're doing it because we love it. And we want to, and maybe it's a better way to improve ourselves, but those guys can't really afford themselves that. They've just got to get noticed. So there's so many of those sessions where people, the lead group is huge, but that 60% of them are just going to stop at some point because they can't run anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of, it's amazing to watch, but you sort of feel, makes you sort of a little bit aware around what these guys are there trying to do, and the others that aren't the elite Kenyans that are just, they see these guys coming home with the big paychecks and the flash cars, and that's their only way out, is to jump in with these guys and just hope that they can, hang with them one day and get noticed.
In talking about elite Kenyans and performances, we can't move off the Kenyan running, Ben, without hearing from you about your thoughts around the break-in 2 attempt with Kipchoge. What was your response to that incredible day?
Yeah, I've got mixed thoughts on that. I think at the beginning I thought, this is, just a Nike marketing engine, and this is, and I was curious about it. I was interested to see what would happen. I think it showed that, it was an amazing run. Didn't miss 2 hours by much, Kipchoge. That was incredible. I actually thought Nike did really well. I think they got what they wanted out of it. I think it was great for people to watch. I thought it was actually better to watch that than some of the time trial marathons that are the real world record attempts in some of the races you see these days, because they're just the same over and over and over. And this was actually at least a little bit different. But I do worry that the athletics will move towards that. I don't want 5 of those happening a year.
Yeah.
I do worry that it's all about pure marketing, and it's about trying to break a time, and you lose that that racing side of it. I think more marathons should be pure races, like a few of the US ones that are without pacemakers. I think the sport would benefit from having more of those, because I think there are too many sort of world record attempts, and part of the problem is there's so many amazing Kenyans that can run a world record on any given day. So you can have a world record attempt 4 or 5 times a year. But I actually thought that in isolation, that event was pretty good in retrospect. I quite enjoyed watching it. I thought Mike did it well. And it offered something a little bit different. But I do worry that there's going to be an Adidas sub 2 attempt and a ASIC sub 2 attempt, and there's going to be a few of those per year, and people will get bored pretty quickly, I'm sure.
Yeah.
They'll try and do more and more and more. It'll become a thing where there'll be loads of spectators, and it'll become all about the shoes and the brand. And the sport does need changing a little bit. So in some ways, if they do something, that gets people there and get people excited, I'm okay with that. But I don't want it to be just about, just that sort of thing where it's just 5 runners running around a track, and there's that's it. But then if people aren't interested, the brands won't do it, because it's all about marketing the brand in that respect. So maybe it'll sort of regulate itself. If it doesn't captivate people, then there's nothing in it for the brands sponsoring it.
Yeah, so time will tell. Talking about best performances, Ben, in your career, there's been disappointments as per any athletic career. There's been some highs. 2013 City to Surf victor, 2010, 2014 Commonwealth Games representative for Great Britain with, I believe, 11th and 14th place respectively there. Out of all your performances, though, Ben, what's the one that's the sweetest to you, and why?
It's a good question. I think City to Surf. And there's a few reasons. I think that year that was probably one of my best years. And I'd qualified for things, but I'd never won a big race. So all the marathons I'd done, I'd just been trying to qualify. I'd never been in the top 10 of a marathon. I'd never won a big race. And that going into that race, I'd had some really, I knew I was running really, really well. And I lived 600 meters at the time from the start of City to Surf. And it's so big in Australia. I mean, it's hard for people outside of Australia to really get because it's not big elsewhere. And what's great about that race is, the fact that it's good and bad. There's no real cash on offer. So it is just the people that live in Australia are the ones that do it. There's good prizes for winning, but it's not cash. So you don't get the big African contingent coming in to run it. And I think that makes it, again, something a little bit different. It gives people like me a chance to potentially win it as well. So and everything went really well in that race. I remember just my emotions in that race as well. I remember Liam Adams was probably not in the best form of his life going into that race. I remember doing the sort of press conference with him the couple of days before, and he was being quite negative. He was saying how hard he was finding marathon training, that he was really tired. And I just thought, well, I feel really good. And I'd beaten him in a half marathon a few weeks before. And I thought, well, if he's talking that negatively, I think he's not that positive about this race. So this is mine to really try and get away and make him think that, I'm not feeling great and take a bit of the fight out of him, because I knew that Liam Adams on his day is a better runner than me, for sure. So I went hard up Heartbreak Hill. I got a gap. I just thought, right, okay, I know now the race starts. I've got the gap. I cannot let him get back, because he'll get that hope back again. And I remember finding that so hard along the top of Heartbreak Hill. There's a few little hills after that. And I was just like, okay. And I didn't really know what the gap was. I remember people shouting, go for the record, the gap's big. I was like, that record is pretty safe. I'm not going to go sub 40 minutes on this course. But I hit 10K in just outside 30 minutes, I think. And I was like, okay, I'm going well. This is, I know the last 2K is a bit of downhill. And to add a little bit of sort of an extra emotion into the mix, my wife had got wind of the fact that she was we got married earlier that year, and she knew that the first prize was business class flights to South America. And we hadn't had our honeymoon because of other races. So I was like, well, we win this race, and that's our honeymoon sorted. Actually, no, I'm wrong. We were due to get married the next year. So she knew that we'd be able to use flights in the next year. That's right. So she's like, well, we're due to get married. If you pick up these flights, then that's our honeymoon sorted. So, oh, okay. She'd even bought the travel book. She'd already bought the travel book to South America. So I was like, okay. I was like, and at the time I was sort of playing it down, saying, there's a pretty good chance I won't win this race. But I remember coming along the bottom along Bondi Beach, and I could hear people shouting for Liam again. I was like, no, this cannot happen. And I was absolutely dying after that, because I'd gone so hard between sort of 8K and 12K. I cannot lose this here. I cannot give him a chance again. I think he gained on me. He wasn't on my shoulder, but I could hear people shouting Liam. I was like, no. And I just went as hard as I could. I've just got to get to the end of Campbell Parade, get to that turning point with 400 to go. And that's, this is the last K of the race. Just forget that last 400. This is the last K. And I got away from him again. And I was reasonably, I remember at the turnaround, I looked up. I didn't look behind once until that point. It's like, okay, I've got 15 seconds maybe. I knew I was reasonably safe. But just then, and I didn't allow myself to sort of think I'd won it until sort of 200 to go. But just winning a big race, one that, I lived in Sydney at the time. I knew how big it was. It was everyone talks about it. That was pretty amazing for me. To beat actual, guys that are, the real deal as well, like Liam Adams. And the added emotion of trying to win flights for our honeymoon to South America on top of that. It was pretty awesome. And then just the day after, there's actually a friend visiting Sydney at the time. So he sort of said, I'll come and watch the race. And then the day after, sort of enjoying that, a load of friends came to my house for a bit of a party as well. So that was a really good sort of day. I look back and I go, that was amazing. I think, I would probably the actual best performance for me at the time was that jump in 2010 when I went from running a 2:21 marathon to a 2:16, and I automatically qualified because that was my first sort of big champs. I never qualified for anything for GB as a junior. At the time, it was that. But I think, winning a big race and is just adds that little bit more, I think. Because, London Marathon that year, I came 11th in 2010, which was amazing. But I think, when you win the race as well, that just adds a little bit extra.
Yeah, I remember watching that telecast of the City to Surf that year, Ben, and I remember I think you had a white singlet with a blue V on it. Is that right? Or what did you have on that year that you won the City to Surf?
It was I think it was black and red. I think
black and red, was it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And so there you go. I'm off with the fairies. Ben, your PBs, to put listeners in perspective, I mean, to date, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, 14:04 for 5,000 metres. In 2015, half marathon, 1:03.59 here on the Gold Coast in 2013. And the marathon getting down to 2:15.52 in Fukuoka, Japan, 13. Is that where your PBs currently sit?
Yep, that's right. And then 10K I ran at Zatopek in Australia as well, 28:40. So that was I enjoyed that race as well, and it's good that was probably the other big one I did in Australia.
Yeah, sensational. I feel I must put that in there, Ben, because you referenced Leon Adams as the real deal, but I think anyone listening will recognise that you are the real deal, Ben. No matter what.
I beat Liam Adams that day as well. That was probably the other big race I beat Liam in, was Zatopek that year. So I've got two wins against him.
Listeners, if you missed last week's episode, then be sure to jump back and tune in. It was an expert edition featuring Professor Belinda Beck.
In the early 90s, there was an observational study of the Stanford athletes, the varsity athletes. These are elite level athletes. They do a lot of training. And what they did is they compared the bones of the gymnasts, and gymnasts have bones like iron, then runners, cyclists, swimmers, to age match and sex match controls. So people of the same age and sex of all those people that they tested, those athletes. And they found if they ranked them on a scale, the gymnasts, of course, had these really hard, great bones. The runners were next, but they were a fair way below the gymnasts. And then equal to the controls were the cyclists, and lower than the controls were the swimmers.
It's been enormously popular, and I believe part of the reason for that is this is information that every athlete, everybody needs. It's about how to keep your bones healthy as an athlete. We touched on all manners of things with Belinda Beck's episode, the health of bones through food, through exercise, stress reactions, fractures, listener questions. It was an enormous amount of information that Belinda shared. So if you missed that, be sure to jump back, take a listen. And if you find other episodes through the archives there, all the way back to Alistair Day, Surf Lifesaving Champion on episode 1, be sure to download them and take a listen. And if you know someone that would benefit from Belinda Beck's share-ins last week on episode 82, or any of the other guests, thanks in advance for sharing it around. It means the world. Let's now get back to Ben Moreau. Ben, before we go into a performance round, I'd love for you to take us through a little bit of your origin years, your growing up years, what got you into the sport, what was it like growing up, and then we'll throw into the performance round.
Yeah, sure. I'd say I was probably a bit of a one of those that was a bit of an unwilling sort of fell into running sort of guy. Football was my thing, so I grew up in Portsmouth in the UK. Football was all I did. Like, I was obsessed with football, and obviously, it's massive in the UK. I played that all the time, and I got thrown into a couple of cross-country races, and I did okay. I was not amazing. But then a guy started, he was a PE teacher at school, and he was a GB athlete as a junior, and he was a full-time coach, and he started to sort of build the cross-country team there, and I really liked him. And so I was really small for my age at school as well. And I sort of turned up for a couple of training sessions and a couple of races. And he kept saying to me, look, you've got the build to be a runner. I think you could be really good. I was like, no, I don't really want to. As I started turning up, because I liked him, I started turning up to a few more training sessions. And this is when I was like sort of 14, 15. I started getting better quite quickly at running. So I was getting into the school teams. I was never amazing as a junior. Like, there are a lot of guys that just win everything as a junior and it just comes to them naturally and they barely have to train. I wasn't one of those. I was decent. I never made like the national champs, like they call it English schools in the UK. I never made any of those. But I improved quite a lot year on year. And I gave up football when I was 16 and started taking running more seriously. And to give a bit of a reference point, I didn't break 9 minutes for 3K until I was sort of 18, 19. So I wasn't amazing, but I was, reasonable. But then I started, I made that decision. I was like, no, I'm into running now, enjoy it. I started training more, got to university, and, obviously university life sort of gets in the way a little bit, but I was still running all the time. And that's when I started to improve quite a lot. And I started to realize I was better at the longer distances as well. So I went to Oxford Uni and got in the athletics and cross-country teams. And then it was when I was about 21, 22, I started to make some real sort of jumps. I remember one year jumping, I think I was 21, jumping from sort of like 1450 for 5K to 1415. I was like, whoa, okay, that is a huge jump. You don't do that often when you're, a senior athlete. And then I started to improve every year. And it's sort of easy to train more and more when you're improving all the time because you're enjoying it so much. And then I started, I think I was about 27, 28, maybe, no, a little bit younger, maybe 26, 27 when I did my first marathon. So it would have been 2008 or so. And that sort of came because cross country was my thing for ages. I wasn't that great on the track. I was good at cross country though. But that sort of seemed to shift in my mid-20s. I was running really, really well and expected to make some GB teams or at least get close for some of the cross country champs, but I just wasn't happening anymore. And I don't know why. I think my biomechanics changed or something. And then I started to run a lot better on the road and on the track. So like I said, I ran a good 5K when I was sort of 21, 22, and that started to go well. And then I just jumped into a half marathon, and I'd done a national cross-country champs in the UK. I came like 22nd, 25th, and I was like, okay, again, I want to be up there in the top sort of 5 or 6, and I felt like I should be. And cross-country is very competitive in the UK. Like the guys really, get in for it. You get 1,000+ people competing at the national champs, and the good guys turn up.
Wow.
But I jumped into a half marathon and ran sort of 65:20. I was like, okay. And it wasn't my first. I think it was my second or third half, but I didn't think I was running, amazingly well. But on the roads, I was starting to run a lot better. And that's when I started to make this shift to, I'm not a cross-country runner anymore. I'm better on the roads. And I never wanted to do a marathon. It sounded horrible. My coach was telling me you should be a marathon runner. You've got the build, you've got the style, like the way I ran. You soak up the miles in training. And I sort of said yes to placate him, but I didn't want to run a marathon. I was like, halves are hard. A marathon is a whole nother world. Like I don't even want to experience that pain that could be. But I started to realize then that probably I was going to run for GB for anything.
Yeah.
Cross country wasn't happening. I was never going to be, a 13:20 guy on the track for 5K. And at that point, I didn't think I could run sort of sub 29, 28:30 for 10K. So I was like, okay, marathon is where it's at. I know I absorb miles in training. I know that, I'm one of those guys that loses fitness very quickly, but I can maintain it when I'm running big miles. And I can probably keep running more miles to see exactly how I could run over a marathon. So I sort of slightly reluctantly agreed that marathon was probably where it's going to be if I was ever going to run for GB at that point. So I started to make that shift over to the marathon, and it turned out to be the right one. And marathon training benefited me at all distances, actually. I ran faster for 10K and ended up for 5Ks as a result. But that was my journey's been one that a small series of realizations that actually if I take it a bit more seriously, I could be a lot better. I am one of those guys that it was consistent training and running, reasonably big miles that improved me. I'm not someone that could turn up and win a race off barely any training. I had to be, it's similar to, you had Josh Harris on there the other day, and some people might know Steve Way and some of those guys in the UK. I'm someone that I need to train consistently and run big miles to really run well. I wasn't someone that could just turn up and had, bundles of talent and would just win things and just, didn't need to train that much. I was definitely one of those guys.
Yeah, it's interesting, and hence, obviously with where we started with 2016's campaign, being on the start line with jeopardised miles in your legs from the persistent hamstring injuries, certainly you just can't, when it comes to marathoning, you can't take a shortcut to your best run, can you, when it comes to a marathon?
Yeah, exactly. I think the marathon, however talented you are, you can't. I agree. I think some runners can get away with it at other distances. I was never one that really could. I was always at my best when I was running consistent high mileage weeks. I never did crazy high. I think there was a point for me where, and part of that was how I was coached, but I never did ridiculously high like Josh does a lot more. But I would, 100 to 120 mile weeks, week in, week out, with maybe every third or fourth week a little bit easier to freshen up, was what I needed to run at my best. And that would be the case for marathons and actually probably 5K, 10K. I needed the miles and the the consistent sort of long sessions to run at my best.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about sessions. Let's do a performance round, Ben. So a bit of a quick fire threshold session for the day. So your training session most disliked?
I think probably, me being a longer distance guy, it was those, I focused on 1500 and stuff because I didn't want to neglect the speed when I was younger. Some of those 1500 sessions, and there's I remember this session, which I absolutely hated, was you do a 1,000 meter like on the track, 1K flat out pretty much. It's like 99%, let's call it. You have like 5-6 minutes of jogging / walking / sat down, not wanting to carry on. And then you've got to do 3 500s at close to the same pace off about 90 seconds recovery. So, this is sort of goal 1,500 meter pace you're running at. And then you have another sort of 6 minutes recovery, and then 5 300s off a sort of minute walk / jog, trying to do the same again. And I would hate those sort of lactic sessions. I'd be swimming in lactic. My legs would be jelly. I just couldn't cope and function off those sort of lactic sessions. I remember doing those, and I would just delay them, put them off until the last minute. I absolutely hated them. There's definitely on the the other end of the spectrum, there's some marathon runs which I think it depends on the day. It can, like, the sort of marathon hard runs I do would always be built into a long run. So I might do, I think probably some of the hardest ones I did was pace change in long runs. So you do 35K, 38K, and then you do 4 by 15 minutes, where the first 5 minutes of the 15 minutes would be marathon effort. So not necessarily marathon pace, but you feel reasonably comfortable, but you're still moving. Then the next 5 minutes you shift up to half marathon effort, and the last 5 minutes you shift up to 10K effort. I remember that some of the last 15 minutes, I do 4 of those off maybe a 5 minute sort of recovery mile, or not mile in 5 minutes, 5 minutes recovery sort of steady run. And that last 15 minutes, I remember thinking I'm trying harder each 5 minutes, but I'm not getting faster. And some of those would either go well and you'd be able to do them. Other times I wouldn't be able to cope with the pace change. In the 15 minutes, second or third one, you'd have to make a decision where you just go, there's no point me trying to run faster because my legs are done. I'll do a 15-minute effort. But some of those, you've got to do another 2 or 3 15-minute efforts. You're already cooked. And they could be horrible. And I think the big marathon runs, it depends on the day. Sometimes you feel great and you can just get them done and you're fine. Other days, you get into the middle of them and you go, okay, this is going to be one of those days where the tiredness is there. And I'm not going to be able to, this is not going to be enjoyable. And you are just, you're feeling that sort of bit of marathon wobble going on. And they can be horrible when it's not your day as well. But yeah, I think over the two, the lactic stuff just killed me.
And your confidence falls through the floor, doesn't it, on those tough days in training? What about the session you most love, Ben?
It's a good one. I think for me, I love some of the sessions in a group. So, I really got into a great group when I was training in Sydney, and some of those, a session we used to do that, and it's probably the competitive side, but we used to do a session that was in Centennial Park in Sydney, and it'd be a mix of, you run hard up a 90-second hill, and then you do a sort of mile block loop. And I'm reasonably good on the hill, and I'm reasonably good on the mile block as well. But different people would either smash the hill and then sort of sit back on the mile block bit, or they do it the other way around. And so it became a really hard session because you couldn't be at the front all the way because someone's going to batter the hill as hard as they can. And I'm training with, really strong guys. This is like James Nippers, Jeremy Roth, Jeff Hunt, Brad Milosevic, these guys. And so I found that session really hard, but I enjoyed doing it in the group. And it was probably about 10K of running all in, but it just you knew that different people were trying to break other people. And I think the bit I enjoyed more than the actual session itself was just the fact you were sort of watching who was going to try and break who on what rep. And for me as a marathon guy, I was always hanging in. I was just, I would probably even be maybe doing a couple more reps than some of the people in the group. And I was just trying to hang in with the guy who went off hard up the hill, and then the guy who would go hard on the mile block. I would always just try and hang with them. I wouldn't try necessarily and destroy them until it got to the last couple reps. And we're like, okay, let's now see, some of these guys, they would always try and surge mid-session. I never really did that because I knew that the last few reps would be so hard. I just wanted to get it done. So I would just sit with them. But I think I really enjoyed just going through those, just going through that session with those guys, just because it was sort of, that camaraderie you got, and just sort of talking about who was trying to do what in the session, try and second guess who was actually tired and who wasn't, and and just sit in and run behind them, because that's probably what brought me on. I ran a lot of my PBs in that sort of 5 years in Sydney, and it was through running those sessions with those sort of guys and just getting up to another level that I wasn't getting back in London, where I did a lot of it on my own or just with one other person.
Yeah.
It was sessions like that, hills and then mile block running, that I think really got me fit, and just doing it in the group.
And the power of a training group. And Ben, briefly on these ones, the favourite pre-race meal for you? What's been fueling you over these years?
I keep it pretty simple, and I actually found, if we talk like marathon pre-race meal, I found that I needed to cut out protein the day before a race. I actually learned that in half marathons. I would get really bad stomach problems after a half marathon. I'd be doubled over in cramps, and it'd be really, really bad. And then someone, I think it was my coach at the time, said, well, maybe just cut down the protein the day before the race, because it takes longer to digest and could be troubling you. And I used to get it even on long cross country races. I remember, some of the 8 mile, and you have these in the UK, 12K, 15K cross country races, I would get really bad stomach problems. I didn't really know why. I thought it was just because it was a long, hard run. So I cut out protein the day before a race now, before anything that's over 10K. And I would just have simple, pasta and sauce or rice and sauce and something like that. I keep it pretty simple and easy on that side. I'm not superstitious really about food, so I don't have a one thing I always go to, but it's pasta or rice and some sauce, and then in the morning before a race, some porridge or some toast and a banana or something will do me. I eat about 2.5 hours, 3 hours before a marathon normally. Yeah. And then that'll, and then it's just sort of, sports drink and water from there on in.
Some great information there, Ben. Great sharings. Bedtime, morning time. What do you like there?
I try and get 8 hours. Luckily, I don't have kids or anything, so I can enjoy the luxury of getting a bit more sleep. I'm probably bedtime. I'm probably in bed at about 10 to 10:30, and then I'll read for a bit. Quite often, it's probably somewhere between 10:30 and 11. I'll go to bed. I don't love morning runs, so if I'm running in the morning, like I said, I'm only doing once a day most of the time now. But if I'm running in the morning, I'll get up at 6:30. I have been known to get up in the morning at 6:30 and go, I'll put that off till sort of 7:30, 7:45. If I'm not running in the morning, 7:30 I usually get up. So I'm usually in the office for about 9. When I was training properly, I would still only get up at 6:30. I'd be out the door by 6:45 and get a run either into, if I had to do more than an hour, I'd run into the office. If not, I would sort of jog around sort of Opera House, Botanical Gardens, and then go from there. So I'm not a really early riser. I'm not someone that loves getting up at 5 a.m., having breakfast, having a coffee, and then getting out the door at 6:15 for the run or something like that. So I usually put it off as late as possible. But yes, 10:30, 6:30 are probably my goals. for
Your
that.
goal bedtime. It's good to have goals around bedtime, isn't it? And rising. Who's the athlete you most admire and why, Ben?
It's a good question. I think growing up or getting into marathons when Paula Radcliffe was at her prime, I found that her approach to training and getting everything right was someone that I really admired and aspired to. I never ran as fast as her for a marathon, which sort of got me a little bit. But she ran 2:15:20. I should have run faster than I have done for a marathon, but I just found that incredible. And the way she ran, that sort of she knew what time she could run, and she would just try and run that from the start. And when she got it right, it just went incredibly well. And I've met her a couple of times, luckily, and but that sort of mentality she had was incredible. And like I said, I struggled when I tried to have that same mentality, but I really admired her to be able to focus on every detail, think about sort of everything, and just run she trained hard, but also I did a couple of runs with her, and she does her steady runs hard. She's not someone that can do an easy jog. So she does, everything is hard. And, when I was marathon training, I needed to give myself those easy days. And I'd say to myself, look, this is one of those days where you just need to run slow and you need to jog. I don't think she ever did that. I think everything for her was, not eyeballs out, but she would run pretty quick. So I really admired the way that she could put those miles together, look after herself, and the way she raced as well was awesome. And obviously being British at the time, and being a marathoner, she was the one. So that's probably the one athlete that sticks out. A lot of the others are probably guys closer to home that I trained with. You pick up a lot from the people you're probably most inspired by at that point, people you're training with. And there are a few at university that weren't amazing athletes, but they were the guys at the time. I was like, these guys have run fast times. I want to run with these guys, and they pushed me to do a bit more at the time. And I think there are a lot of people that that are just around you at that point in your life that inspire you as well. But in terms of elite athletes, I think Paula was the one for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Hard to go past, right? Particularly being a proud Great Brit, mate. Toughest competitor you've ever raced against, Ben?
That's a good question. I think trying to think who that might be. I think to go back to Liam again. I think Liam Adams. I think we had at that point, sort of when I was running really well, 2012, 2013, 2014. I think you notice tough competitor. I think you have to be at the front of a race to really notice who's tough. A lot of my races I've done, you're in the mix in the teens somewhere, and people come and go a little bit. It's the front of the race where you really notice who's tough, I think, because that's where the real tactics of the race dictate what's happening further back. So I think I can only really talk about it in the race where I've been trying to get a win at that point. And Liam's always been really, really tough. He's someone that will surge mid-race to try and break you. That's going to happen, so you've got to sort of hang with it. And I've had a good few races with Liam, and I think he's someone that I found he will run himself into the ground, and I have to know that. And he will also, he's willing to break himself to try and break other people around him as well. I know he trains very hard. I've seen some of the train sessions he does as well, which is incredible. So I think, I'd put, for me, that I've actually, been at the pointy end of races trying to win a race. I think Liam Adams is the toughest guy I've come across in Oz as well.
Yeah, wow, that's outstanding. And Ben, last question on the performance round. Is there a mantra that you've used throughout your career when you've been racing? A bit of self-talk that's consistently there?
Yeah, there's probably a few. So I think it's in a race, anything can happen. And when you're in a race, you're only thinking about how you feel. You're thinking, I either feel great, this is okay, this is comfortable, this is awesome, or I feel awful. This is done. Those guys are looking incredible, but you forget that they also are thinking exactly the same things. And when someone starts to move away, that could be a last-ditch attempt to try and break you because they know they're feeling rubbish. So you've got to just think anything can happen. I've just got to run the hardest I possibly can, and you've got to make the decisions in a race that you think suit you at the time. So if there is a surge and you always second guess, is this something, this feels a bit uncomfortable, but can I go with it? And the other guy is feeling good, or are they just trying to get a gap to try and break the field? You've got to make those decisions, but just remember that anything can happen. So I've always thought of that in a race as well, that when people get away, they can come back. Don't give up. They can come back. And actually, I did a half marathon in Singapore the other day, and there was a Kenyan group, and there's a turnaround with about 4K to go, and they had 90 seconds on me, and there was a big gap behind me, and if I'm honest, I cruised in a little bit. Then I got to the last 200, and all of a sudden, one of them, running in for, I thought it was third at the time, but it was actually fourth, was within sight. And then I started to surge, and I didn't have time to catch him, so I was kicking myself that my own thing, I sort of
you let go.
That I went against. And the difference is it's so hot in Singapore that if you want to, that extra sort of excuse to not hurt yourself is there. But yeah, that's one of them.
Oh, that's great. And Ben, final questions here for our time today. If you could boil everything you've boil it down to one bit of advice to help listeners pursue their physical best performance, whatever the endeavour, what would Ben Moreau's single bit of advice be?
I think for me, talking about my sort of experience and journey through running, it's just if you keep consistently training, those jumps will come. And then you gradually increase the amount you can cope with and the amount of training. And it might happen over, a year or a few years, but those jumps do come. And it's about the consistency. And I think, there are a lot of people that will do 12 weeks of training, have a bit of time off, and then they go, well, I only get to a certain point. But if you do enjoy it, just keep consistently running. Just run every week. Keep going out. Keep getting the training done, and those jumps do come. Especially for the younger athletes. Like I said, I wasn't an amazing junior. I'm not someone that, I didn't make a Great Britain or a junior team. I didn't even make that qualify for the national champs when I was a junior. So I couldn't even run the times to get to the championships to even qualify to run for Great Britain for track and so on. But I consistently kept training, and as you get older and you keep increasing the training load, I made a lot of improvements. And as an adult, it's the same. I think if you keep going out and doing the training, get into a group, make it easy for yourself to get it done. I've found that if you're meeting someone for a run or running with a group, it just makes mentally getting the training done so much easier. So if you can get into a group, keep training, you will make big improvements. And it doesn't happen in a straight line. It's not linear. You get little jumps, it's little steps. And sometimes you take one step back and take 2 or 3 forward. But I think, for me, it's just keep going and you will find those improvements because the body adapts. It sometimes has to go through a little bit of a tough patch to then, cope and adapt and then move on.
It's not linear. I love that, Ben. So there's some great wisdom there. Thanks for sharing. Ben, finally, if you could issue listeners with one physical challenge for the week, what's Ben Moreau's going to be? This can be entry level or it can be extremely challenging.
That's a good one. I think do a training session that you haven't done before. Look up some of the training sessions that people do, and just go right. And especially if you're self-coach, and I do this now because I'm just running. I choose the sessions I want to do, and I'll go because there's ones that you sort of feel reasonably comfortable with. Go and look up a session that you haven't done that just feels completely different, whether that's an interval session or like I said, one of those Kenyan Fartleks sessions or a hill session, and just go and do one of those just to experience doing it. Because I think and if you can do it with someone else, even better. I think, go and do something different, share that pain with someone, because that makes it not at the time, but afterwards all the more enjoyable. And the weeks back, when you look back at it, I think go and find someone to do something that's just completely different that, other great runners used to do in the past or something like that. And go and get that done and just experience doing different training. Because I think, that's part of the fun as well, is just going and saying, well, what will that feel like if I do that? And I think, go and find a session, get it done, and see how it feels, and share it with someone else who's mad enough to do it with you.
Share it with someone else to inflict the pain. And
exactly.
Listeners, if you take on the challenge, be sure to let Ben and I know. And Ben, where can listeners find and follow you on your journey?
So I've got a blog, benmoreau.net. It's a mix at the moment of weird places in Asia that I try and fit runs in, and my experiences of what it's like to go to random places like Vietnam and Myanmar and try and run. Like I said, it's less on the elite training and more on the life experience at the moment. But there are some, I've kept some of my training records in there, and I sort of try and keep it reasonably lighthearted. So that's probably the best place. I'm also on Twitter at Ben_Moreau. So they're probably the best places to find me. And
Ben, I was looking through the blog recently, and it's a great read, listeners. So you got to jump over, check it out. We'll tag it up in the show notes. But I really love some of the runs you've done recently through Myanmar and places with obviously many obstacles along the way. Ben, lastly, fun question to end our time today. 3 people you could have at dinner, living or past. Who would be at Ben Moreau's table and why?
Oh, that is a tough one. I think Emil Zatopek's got to be in there. I read his book recently. People that don't know him, he's a Czech Republic runner, or Czechoslovakia as it was then in the 50s, who sort of took running to a new... He was the first one to realise that if you did really high volumes, you could achieve a lot. He had a horrible running style, and he won the 5K, 10K and marathon at, I think, the 54 Olympics. And I've just read his book, and he's an absolute nutter. He would do something like 60 times 400 meters, and he was insane. It'd be great to get him there. I think it'd be good to get a few of those guys that are all, sort of the nutters of running as well. So someone like Steve Ovett, he's a British 1500 guy who's known as a bit of a bad boy. He's around when Seb Coe and him were, big 800, 1500 rivalry. It'd be good to get him there as well. And I think if we're going to get Steve there, we might as well get Seb Coe along at the same time, because I don't think they got on. And I think that was real. I don't think it was a manufactured rivalry. I think it was real. And I'd like to ask Seb a few questions around like the whole, the doping stuff in athletics at the moment, because obviously he's very involved with the regulations of athletics at the moment. So it'd be good to get his view. I'd love to try and get some red wines down him and understand a bit more about what's actually going on, and whether the conspiracies are real and some of that as well. And if him and Steve end up having a fight, that would be awesome. I think that'd be a great. I'll just sit back and watch it happen.
Well, mate, that is a talent laden table, at least with obviously you're sitting there as well. So that would be very entertaining. Ben, you're a true gentleman of the sport. And mate, I just want to wish you all the best for the journeys ahead and where the journey takes you.
Cheers, Brad. It's great to be on the show. Have a great one.
So there you have it, listeners, another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I hope and trust you enjoyed Ben Moreau's sharings. If you did, be sure to let both Ben and I know by sharing your feedback on social at Brad_beer, or Ben's handles. All can be found over at the show notes, pogophysio.com.au. Don't forget, if you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, it's simple. Simply hit subscribe from within your favourite app and you will find this in your ears each and every week. Massive thank you to the two very good folk who make this show possible, and that is Sophie Walker at POGO Physio, all things podcast administration, and Daryl Misson, audio engineer extraordinaire. Thank you, guys. Lastly, if you're into running, you can now pick up your copy of my Amazon running and jogging bestseller, You Can Run Pain Free. It's available now on audiobooks, including Audible or iBooks. It's also available on Kindle or paperback versions from Amazon internationally or Pogo Physio online inside Australia. Listeners, coming up next week, I get to tick a bit of a childhood dream off. I can't share any more than that, other than to say this gentleman has been dubbed the voice of cycling, and I am referring to...
Now this is the battle for who takes the yellow home after Sunday as we come into this beautiful town or in the Wazon area of France.
That's right, none other than Phil Liggett, MBE. That's Member of the Order of the British Empire. Phil Liggett's cycling commentary career is extensive. We speak about all things on this episode. Obviously, we talk about the highs of his career, the amazing decades he spent on the mic for the Tour de France. We speak about his origin story, how Phil entered the workforce in this capacity, his own junior cycling days where he raced as a professional. We also talk around, obviously, the highs of cycling, the lows of cycling. Phil shares around Lance and the whole Lance Armstrong fallout. And it's really just a whole lot of fun. So be sure to tune in next week to Phil Liggett on the Physical Performance Show. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.